Story 1. A few days after someone left a sticky note with a heart on my door, which was already scary since I am a woman living alone, I walked into the kitchen and someone tried to open my door aggressively multiple times and even kicked it. This happened a few more times until I placed an old pair of my brother's work boots in front of the door. Since then, it has been quiet. Story 2. When I was younger and home alone, a grown man was standing at my window watching me play Just Dance. I didn't know he was there until my sister came in screaming, saying that the man had run when she saw him over the back fence and into the forest behind my house. Story 3. I once screamed at a shadowy figure in my hallway for 5 minutes before realizing it was my own hoodie hanging on a doorknob, laughing out loud. Story 4. Rapid, heavy pounding on my bedroom door, accompanied by screaming and a knife being stabbed through it several times. It turned out my insane brother had gotten home and decided to mess with me. Yes, this was typical of how he would act. Story 5. Woken up by aggressive tapping on the old wooden floor next to my bed. I turned on the light, got up, and saw my Labrador foaming at the mouth and having a full epileptic seizure. It was the first time, and I thought he was dying. I brought him downstairs while he was thrashing and went out on the porch in my underwear to call my mother. I did not have a car. She came to get us, and we ran to the emergency veterinarian at 4 a.m. He started medication and improved but still had occasional seizures. The scariest experience of my life. Story 6. I was home alone playing on my laptop at 2 a.m., about to go to bed, when I heard the doorbell ring. Then I heard at least 2 men outside talking. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I thought I was about to get robbed. Of course, my outdoor cameras decided to act up the one time I needed them. The app wouldn't load. Usually, it loads almost immediately. Now I was convinced I was being robbed because I assumed the men outside were messing with the cameras. I was standing at the back door barefoot, with one hand on the doorknob and the other checking the app, ready to run at a moment's notice. My heart was racing, probably 150 beats per minute. 2 minutes passed, and the app still wasn't loading. I had my exit route planned. Open the door, run, jump the fence, and keep running. Then I got a call from my friend who lives in my neighborhood. It was him and another friend at the door, and he wanted me to open it. Huge relief. They weren't trying to scare me because he assumed I'd check the camera as soon as they arrived. It was more of a prank because they had Nerf guns when I opened the door, and they said, "Stick them up." I told them what happened, and we all had a good laugh about it. Story 7. I started choking and there was no one there to help me. I was literally seeing stars and starting to black out before I cleared it by giving myself an improvised Heimlich maneuver on the back of a chair. Story 8. I was watching a horror movie with my girlfriend, and we stopped at some point because it was too scary. We tried to watch something else, but the audio was still from the horror movie. We changed channels and tried turning the TV on and off, but the audio remained the same. This continued for about 10 minutes, as if the horror movie was saying, "You can't run away." After several restarts, the audio returned to normal, but during those 10 minutes, it was really frightening. Story 9. A bear damaged a tree near me, not at my home, but at my grandparents' cabin. I was there for the night to clean the place and meet the next group of renters. After a long day of cleaning, I sat down on the front porch area to relax and immediately fell asleep. I woke up in complete darkness to the sound of something smashing and crashing a tree, followed by some grunting. I had no idea what it was, so I peered around the corner and, just as I did, coming out of the shadows was a large bear. It scared me a lot. I instinctively shouted, "What the heck? Get away!" The bear snorted and then tottered off into the shadows again. After a few moments and deep breaths, I walked to the door and instinctively locked it. A few moments later, I started laughing at myself for doing that. The next morning, I saw what the bear had done. There was a tree near the front of the cabin that was fairly tall, about 50 feet or more. My grandmother had suspected for a few years that it was diseased. The bear had pushed the tree over, and it broke about 4 feet off the ground. Fortunately, the rest of the tree crashed away from the cabin. Instead of being able to relax and wait for the renters, I had to cut the tree up and stack the logs. It was quite a morning workout. Story 10. One of the first times I was allowed to be home alone was because my dad wanted to stay at a lady's place. Around 1 a.m., there was loud pounding on the door. I woke but was frozen in fear. There was more pounding, and I heard a police officer announce who he was. I opened the door. A police officer yelled, "Where are your parents?" I thought I had committed a crime, or maybe my dad had, by leaving me alone. He then said the house next to mine was on fire and I had to evacuate. Cut to me outside in my boxers and a Wolverine t-shirt watching the house next door ablaze. Story 11. When I was a child, I was left home alone, and some of my mother's home canned jars in the kitchen started swelling and exploding. I grabbed a hammer from the balcony and ran out of the apartment with shaking hands. Story 12. Heard a bang at 2 a.m., grabbed a hairbrush like a weapon. Turned out it was my cat knocking over cereal. We both almost died. Story 13. Started hearing noises after watching a slapped ham video, and I immediately got behind my dog for protection as I called my older brother in a panic. Story 14. I used to live in a rougher neighborhood and would occasionally hear gunshots coming from down the street. Story 15. I heard the front door open while I was upstairs. I called out, thinking it was my brother. There was no response. I went downstairs. The door was locked. Nobody was there. I still do not know what I heard. Story 16. Someone knocked on the door and tried opening it repeatedly. It was a couple we knew but were not close to. It was odd that they did that when there was no vehicle outside the house, making it look like we were not home. But I was. My heart was racing, and I wanted to cry. I am glad they could not open the door and eventually left. I was very scared and thought something bad might happen if they found out I was inside my house. Story 17. I wasn't at home, per se, but I did end up spending the weekend at my grandparents' house with my little sister one summer. We were alone, just relaxing while our grandparents were out, and we were given money to order pizza. We were staying up late watching television when the front door started opening for no reason. We both froze, holding our breath. Our grandparents' two dachshunds barked, and the door suddenly stopped opening. I have no idea to this day if someone actually tried to come in but was scared off by the dogs, or if it was the wind. It was still very scary when I was in high school with my kid sister. Story 18. I rented an older house with a door in the basement that led outside. The door was always locked and had a handwritten sign on it that said not to unlock it because it would set off an alarm. Imagine my horror when one day, my roommate was not home, and I went to the basement to do laundry. That door was not only unlocked, but wide open. I thought for sure someone was about to knock me out cold from behind me. Story 19. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to the feeling of someone rustling my hair. I was home alone. My wife also thought she saw someone peeking out from behind a corner. Then the dog would just stare at part of the house and growl. It was not even an old creepy house. It was built in the late 1980s. Interestingly, I now live in an old creepy house that is over 100 years old and have not had any strange occurrences. Story 20. I was broken into while in the house, and a man under the influence of drugs attempted to break in, swinging the door handle and yelling LSD. Story 21. I heard something on the back patio, opened the sliding glass door, and saw a man trying to steal my bicycle. I grabbed a sword from the wall and chased him down the street half naked. Story 22. I had moved from the city to my new house in a rural area while the renovation was underway. The interior was stripped down to the studs, with no insulation, no ceilings, and plywood floors. It was quite rough. Late one night, I had my window open. It was completely dark outside, with no lights inside and no streetlights in the area. As I was trying to fall asleep, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. I froze, thinking someone was walking around my house in the middle of the night. My heart raced, and my dog was alert to the sounds as well. After a few minutes, I crept up to the window and shone my flashlight outside. Turned out to be some deer visiting my backyard. I got used to that noise quickly after that. Story 23. I was not alone. My younger brother, who was 12, was the only other person there, so I am counting it. I was watching a movie in the living room of our mother's house while it was raining. When I heard something tapping against the front door, I assumed it was just the rain. Eventually, the tapping became too frequent to ignore, and I became paranoid. I went into my brother's room to get him, and he was already looking at me like, "You hear that too?" We grabbed a knife from the kitchen because we were never told where the guns were. Then we went to the master bathroom because it was the only room not right out in the open. We called emergency services, then our father, and both of them were on their way. When they arrived, whoever had been outside had already left. Apparently, it was just one of my mother's drug-addicted friends who occasionally breaks into her and her boyfriend's house when they are not home. She literally laughed and said, "You would have thought that somebody was trying to break in or something." Yes, we did. I was angry at her for a while because my mind twisted the situation into this. Say he was harmless, but if he had broken in while his mental state was altered and saw my brother and me there, people he had only met once in passing, what if he had thought that we had broken in and wanted to protect the house from us? But she could not see that and just thought that us thinking somebody had broken in was very funny. Story 24. Not me, but my sister. My mom was with me at football, my dad was away on business, and my sister was home alone. Not an unusual occurrence. She was probably about 16 or so. She was upstairs at the rear of the house when she heard the sliding door off the kitchen open, basically beneath her. Obviously startled, she ran down the upstairs hallway to the open portion near the living room, where you could see the sliding door, and it was wide open. She ran down the stairs and out the front door to the neighbor's house and called the police. The police came and searched the house with guns drawn. They cleared it. Then they had my sister and the neighbor come back inside to explain what happened. As they entered the back bedroom where my sister had been when the whole thing happened, there was a man standing at the bottom of the garden, in the long grass right by a retention basin maybe 50 yards away, just staring back at our house. The officers clearly knew the man and went out to talk to him. There was a house back in the woods behind ours, and we would constantly hear the man screaming at his wife. One summer day we were eating outside when they were having a screaming match, which was interrupted by gunshots, followed by silence. We never heard him arguing with his wife again that summer. We did eventually, but it was very eerie. Anyway, it turned out to be that man. Nothing ever came of it, I don't think, but it shook us up, especially my sister. There was also another incident when I was jumping on the trampoline near the bottom of the garden, not really paying attention to my surroundings. At some point I landed, looked up, and he was right there, about 7 to 8 feet away, standing in the same long grass that intersected both properties, drinking a coffee and just staring at me. I immediately ran back to the house, and by the time I got to the deck and looked back, he was gone. Very unsettling. Story 25. I once woke up in my tent to loud crunching right outside. I thought it was a bear, but it turned out to be a raccoon digging through my backpack. I still could not sleep for the rest of the night. Story 26. Choking on some food. The realization that no one was there to help or call an ambulance. I could have just died and no one would have known for a day or two. Story 27. Nighttime watching television. My golden retriever started to growl in the direction of my bedroom. I tried a few times to get him to stop, but he continued barking at my bedroom. I grabbed his collar and my cell phone and got out of the house. I called my older brother to come check it out. He found nothing. I made him stay over. Story 28. My brothers and I were home alone. Older brother was 10 or 11. I was 6 or 7. Younger brother was 2 or 3. We were all watching cartoons when we started hearing loud banging in our parents' room. It sounded like someone was trying to break down their bedroom door, which was locked with a simple doorknob lock. This went on for a few minutes. Older brother got 2 large knives from the kitchen, gave one to me, and had me hide with little brother to protect him. Older brother went to the door with the large knife, unlocked it, and threw it open. Out ran our orange cat, Pixel. In true orange cat style, he wanted out of that room and was throwing his whole self against the door repeatedly. Story 29. The house was struck by lightning. My sister and I were home alone as kids. It was like a bomb going off. Story 30. Some lady was staring into a window with no curtains to pull in front of it. This happened in the middle of the night in a rural area known for drug users. I was about 14, and my uncle, who was supposed to be in the house with me, was nowhere to be found. While I was on the landline telling my mother what was going on, the lady waved at me. I was extremely frightened. Story 31. My mom was living with her friend in a house in the late 1970s. They had both gone out on dates, and I was going to have a quiet evening at home. I was 16. I saw a man with a gun creeping around the house trying to get in. I discovered that the locks were double-keyed to go in and out of the house. I had to find the key to escape before he got inside. I went out one door as he found access to an unlocked window. I fled to a neighbor's house and banged on their door. Thankfully, it was an older couple, and the man went out with a shotgun just in case. It turned out to be the ex-boyfriend of my mom's friend who came back for her. It was scary. Story 32. I had a neighbor in my apartment strip try to kick down my door. I guess his son had been arrested for drugs, and he thought we had snitched even though we never spoke to them. It was super scary. I didn't live there much longer but caught the guy looking through our windows a few times, just generally being creepy. The landlord refused to do anything about it because he didn't want to get involved. He had a hard time keeping tenants in that spot afterward. Dealing with that neighbor left me with no questions about why. Story 33. Many years ago, my wife and children left for a couple of hours, so I went tanning under our solarium because we had not seen the sun for weeks. I did not check the weather report, but apparently thunderclouds were rolling in. While I was tanning, lightning struck and the power went out. In an instant, everything went black and cold. For a moment, I thought I had died before regaining my senses. That was very scary. Story 34. Heard someone whisper my name while I was half asleep. Turned out to be the Google Home glitching. Story 35. Toilet paper has run out. It was late at night and I really needed it. I had to use a scary alternative. Story 36. Thought I was about to get murdered. Turns out I just suck at cooking. I was about 14 or 15, home alone while my dad worked night shifts. I was making dinner, feeling all grown up, when suddenly, bang, something slammed into the front door. Heart racing, I grabbed my little pocket knife like I was in an action movie and went to check it out. Nothing. 10 minutes later, bang, again. At this point, I was convinced someone was trying to break in. We had had a few break-ins on the street, so I was fully bracing for a real-life home alone. I sneaked around the house checking windows, ready to go full ninja mode, only to realize I hadn't poked enough holes in my baked potatoes. They exploded in the oven. I almost fought a spud with a knife. Story 37. One morning I woke up to an enormous man walking into my house, past my bedroom, into the bathroom, and turning the shower on. I really thought something truly horrifying was about to happen to me, so I did the only thing I could do. I popped out in my underwear with a knife in each hand, screaming, "Who are you?" After some tense back and forth, it turned out he was a maintenance man for my rental office who was sent to the entirely wrong address. The tenant had an issue with their shower and said maintenance could let themselves in. I escorted him out of my house, knives in hand. Story 38. There was a break-in in the basement. Everybody was out. It was after 10:30 at night, maybe after midnight, I don't remember. I asked, "Who is there?" and waited a second, then said, "Whoever it is, I have a gun." They left. I am in Canada. Nobody really has a gun. Story 39. I was trying to make those sugar honeycomb things from Squid Game. The instructions said to melt sugar and add baking soda. I thought baking soda and baking powder were the same, so when the mixture started to rise, I didn't know what to do. I ran water over it. I feared the house was going to burn down. There was burnt sugar and baking soda in the pot for about a week because it hardened and was hard to remove. Story 40. The neighbor's house exploded. It was apparently a murder-suicide. The explosion smashed all the windows in the house and damaged the roof. Our parents were on a recreational vehicle trip with some family friends, so it was just my sister and me at home. Story 41. My sister was living alone in an apartment for college and had a habit of leaving her blinds open. One night, while she was changing, she saw a face quickly duck out of sight at her window. She ran over to check and saw a man climbing down a pipe that ran from the ground to her window. She lived 3 or 4 stories up. She called our parents in a panic and did not get much sleep after that. Story 42. When my parents divorced in 2006, my father was convinced that my mother was cheating on him. He had a loyal group of friends who were bored and prowled outside our house for the next year. At that time, marijuana was illegal in our state, and he had left all of his equipment to grow it in the basement. Often, I would be awakened by people at the windows or trying to break in. The scariest incident occurred one night in January 2007 when someone tried to break into my room specifically. I was awakened, slipped out of my room, and confronted the person in the yard. The encounter resulted in a fistfight, and I ended up breaking the man's collarbone. The noise woke neighbors who came to break it up before the police arrived. The police let him go because I had no footage or proof, and he was not caught in the act when they arrived. Story 43. Does it count if I wasn't inside yet? I got home with my house alarm going off, so I quickly texted my mother to ask why the alarm was going off. Her brilliant reply was, "That's what alarms do." I had no clue house alarms were supposed to go off before entering, but hey, I must be foolish not to know that. Feeling suicidal, I decided to go inside to face the intruder. The worst they could do was let me live, right? My dog had set off the alarm, but it was a very tense hour checking the house. Story 44. Hearing my mother saying my name from the kitchen while I was in my bedroom. Meanwhile, my mother had left for a week and was staying at my grandparents' home. I had never been so scared before. Story 45. I was babysitting for some family friends. I was 17 or 18 years old. At 11 p.m., the doorknob turned and the dog barked. I thought the parents were home, so I went to answer the door. No one was there. Story 46. Having a nightmare within a nightmare within a nightmare and actually waking up with the lights off and alone. Story 47. Someone kicked my front door open when I was home alone. I was 11. I wasn't feeling well that morning, so I stayed home from school. I felt better by the afternoon. Around 2:30, I got a knock at the door. I am not supposed to answer, so I did not. I peeked out the window and saw 2 people standing there. One was wearing a blue jacket, both had hoods. I do not remember any other details. They kept knocking, and then there was a loud crash. I screamed like a little girl. They heard me and immediately ran. I could see them running up the street. The door had been kicked open, and part of the door frame had broken off. I called my mom at work, who had me go to my neighbor's house to hide. No one was home, but I have access to their key for emergencies, until she and my dad arrived. The police took about 45 minutes to arrive. They went to the wrong street with the same name. I think they were caught eventually. The strange thing about it was that it happened at all. My house is close to the road, very visible, and in between 2 secluded houses that have full view of the backyard. Why they picked my house and not either of those which had been robbed successfully before is beyond me. Not only was it broad daylight, it was also right in front of where a school bus would have dropped off children, about 10 minutes before that bus was supposed to arrive. I guess it is a good thing I stayed home sick. If I had not, I would have probably walked in on them. Story 48. I was cleaning out the basement of my new-to-me home. I put a bunch of things on the screened-in back porch. When I came back to get the things I wanted to keep, everything was gone. No, it was not a good neighborhood. Story 49. I technically was not home alone when it happened, but I was sleeping in the attic. My dad called me in a panic from the hospital to say that my mom had just fallen down the stairs. It was the stairs below the stairs to my bedroom. He chose to take care of all the necessary things first and stay with my mom, not waking me up. I thank him to this day because I do not know how it would have affected me to see her helpless at the bottom of the stairs and in the ambulance. I am used to a lot medically, but this would have been traumatizing for sure. When he called me, I was immediately awake and walked down. I still saw tiny bloody scratches on the wall from her trying to grab onto something. She fell from the top. The next day, I went to work late, which I should not have, and was in shock, receiving updates the whole day. She had broken many bones and had a severe concussion. She had to sleep in a hospital bed downstairs for a while afterward. It was a difficult moment, and I am still alert when she walks on stairs and stairs in general. Story 50. I live in a rough neighborhood of Houston, Texas. My truck is parked just outside, in front of my apartment complex, because of affordable housing and the lack of a parking garage or gate. My truck is parked just in front of the steps I use to enter and leave my apartment. The walls and windows are very thin. I have heard people attempt to break into my truck and my neighbor's cars about 5 times so far this year. I have lost my tailgate twice. Hearing that activity at 3 in the morning is very anxiety-inducing. Story 51. I had a neighbor's boyfriend break in by lifting our garage door. I couldn't sleep, and he opened my door and proceeded to walk around to the right side of the bed. He thought I was home alone, but I screamed for my father, and he ran out of our house. The man was arrested on the side of my house. Story 52. I tried to carry the base of a glass-top coffee table down some narrow stairs to the basement and figured it would be easier to fit if I slung it. Picture a heavy, rounded-edge rectangle across my shoulder like a bandolier. Well, the thing slipped and I suddenly could not expand my chest enough to breathe. Super dumb move. I had to stay calm and slowly get on the ground to shimmy it off. What a lame way to die if I panicked and just broke all my ribs and suffocated. Anyway, I still miss that coffee table. Story 53. I had an ear infection over the weekend. My dad was at the beach house for the long weekend, and it was annoying being half-deaf because of an infection in my ear. He came home on Monday and saw smoke in the house. He asked me if I had been cooking anything, and I said no since I do not like cooking or know how to cook. He eventually found out that the heater was too old, so he is getting it replaced. I had no idea there was smoke, and I did not know how long it had been there either. Story 54. I was in the shower with the bathroom door locked. I glanced at the frosted glass door and saw a clear silhouette of a figure standing right outside. I live alone. I ripped the shower door open, heart pounding, ready to scream or fight. Nothing. No one was there. The bathroom door was still locked from the inside. To this day, I have no explanation. I take baths now. Story 55. A few years ago, I was house and dog sitting for my mom's friend. They had an old and sweet dog named Drake, who liked to slowly walk around the block and watch TV. When I arrived to start my week of house sitting, I realized they had given me the key to the back door, but not the screen door. After attempting to contact them, I was finally given permission to enter by breaking through the metal screen door. It felt illegal and scary to know how easy it was to break into someone's house, but I made it inside. About 5 days into it, I was watching TV with Drake when I decided to get ready to sleep. There was a door separating the kitchen and living room where I was sleeping from the rest of the house. I was supposed to keep that door closed so Drake wouldn't accidentally relieve himself inside. When I got up to brush my teeth, I was sure I closed the door behind me. But 30 seconds into brushing, Drake came meandering past the bathroom door and walked down the hallway. I was confused but assumed I hadn't closed the door all the way. When I stepped into the hall, I saw him sitting in front of one of the kids' bedrooms, lightly pawing at the door. It was odd, but I took him back to the living room. An hour later, around midnight, I was about to sleep but got up to use the bathroom one last time. I made sure to close the kitchen door behind me and walked to the bathroom. Once again, 30 seconds later, Drake waddled down the hallway. I finished, walked into the hall, and saw him sitting in front of the same door, pawing and staring at me. I was confused but decided to humor him. I opened the door to the kids' room. It was mostly empty since the daughter had just moved out to college. Drake immediately walked to the closet at the back of the room and started pawing at that door too. I was sleepy and spooked, especially since I had broken in a few days earlier. I thought the possibilities were: 1. Someone had broken in and was in the closet. 2. There was a ghost in there, since I didn't know how else Drake was getting past the kitchen door. 3. Drake was an old dog wanting something from the closet. I decided to open the closet door but had a thought. If I screamed before opening the door, anyone or anything inside would be more afraid of me. I screamed and opened the door. To my surprise, it was empty. Drake looked at me as if nodding in recognition, and we left the room. I was pretty freaked out, but it was probably just an old house and an old dog. Story 56. Hearing my oldest daughter call my name loud and clear, and she wasn't even here. Both my cats looked at the stairway. Story 57. Finding a gigantic spider and realizing you have to leave the room to get a cup, but when you come back, it will be gone. I can confirm it disappeared. I covered the living room door gap with towels and did not go in there for a few days until my parents got home. Story 58. When I was in university, I rented a basement suite with a roommate in a well-off, safe neighborhood. He was away for the weekend at his parents' place. At night, someone came to my door dressed in a hoodie with their face covered. They repeatedly banged on my door, circled around my apartment, banged on multiple windows, and then went to the back door and banged some more. They also twisted the doorknobs as if trying to get in. I was terrified and cried out for them to go away. Then I heard laughing. It was not a burglar or my roommate, but my sister's friend, whom I barely knew, who decided it would be a funny prank. I was very scared. Story 59. My cat was staring at the basement door, growling with every piece of fur standing on end. She looked like a Halloween decoration. I called emergency services and felt foolish. Story 60. My dog started growling at the corner of my room, staring as if someone was there. He never did that before or after. Story 61. As a widowed adult living alone, I tripped and fell in my garage. I broke my arm. I didn't have my phone on me, but I dragged myself back to the bedroom. First thing in the morning, I dialed 911 and had myself taken to the hospital by ambulance. I was in no condition to drive. Having a bone injection hurts badly. Then having the bone set is enough to make you pass out. Story 62. I watched a rodent trigger the motion sensor alarms by climbing halfway up the window and gnawing on the rubber seal. Story 63. Well, at the time, I knew I was alone and it was around 1 a.m. My family had left for my cousin's party, and I decided to stay because I like to be alone. I fell asleep, and the sound of cooking woke me up from the kitchen. I didn't think much of it because I thought maybe my mom had just come home and was putting leftovers in the fridge. But the noise went on for an hour, so I fully woke up and checked my window to see that the family car was not there. Meanwhile, I was checking the window and could still hear the noise from the kitchen. I went to check, but as soon as I opened my door, the noise completely stopped. I just closed my door and hid because I didn't have the courage to go check. I waited for my family to come back. I even recorded a video of the noise. Super freaky. Story 64. Watching The Exorcist, the dog fell down the stairs behind me during the crawling down the stairs scene. I still have not finished the movie years later. Story 65. Every severe weather event that my unfortunate state experiences for most of the year, every year. Story 66. Living alone and single at 20. I was falling asleep one night when I heard, incredibly clearly behind me, a sigh and the sound of rustling sheets, as if someone had just turned over in bed next to me. I shot awake, absolutely terrified, thinking someone had snuck into my home, but the apartment was completely empty. This ended up being one of many instances like this. The place was just haunted. Story 67. Someone tried to break in while I was in bed. He got through 3 of the 5 locks when I turned on the kitchen light and he left. Very frightening. Story 68. This happened a few years ago. I was home alone during a thunderstorm. Lights flickering, wind howling, the whole cliché package. Around midnight, I heard 3 knocks on my front door. Not the doorbell, just knocks. Slow, heavy, perfectly spaced. I checked the peephole, nothing. 5 minutes later, I heard it again, but this time from the back door. Still nothing. Then my television turned on by itself at full volume, just static. I didn't move. I just sat there like a mannequin, phone in hand, blanket over my head, praying to every god from every religion I could think of. The next morning, I found muddy footprints outside both doors. It turned out my cousin had come over drunk to scare me and couldn't remember which door was the main entrance. The television? A faulty remote sensor. I still haven't forgiven him, but I did install security cameras. Story 69. A drunken neighbor tried to enter my apartment. mistakenly thinking it was his. I started yelling that I was calling the police. He left quickly. Story 70. A few months ago, I was home alone and heard my door slowly creak open. I assumed it was a draft, but when I got up to check, the door was shut tight. The strange part is I live in a studio apartment. Story 71. My wife and I were lying in bed when we heard what sounded like metal slamming against a wall or door. I got my gun and went to investigate. Apparently, some sheet metal that was fixed up as a cover for the back porch had partially ripped off from its fasteners, and the wind was slamming it up and down. Story 72. This happened just a few weeks ago. I have pets, but I am only 10% sure it was the dog. I woke up at 3 a.m. to 3 loud bangs on my front door. I snapped awake, got very scared, and tiptoed down the hall to grab my gun. Then I started trying to peek out the windows, but could not see anyone. I stayed up for about 2 more hours, still scared. Also, just a few days ago, I could have sworn I heard someone using a weed whacker at 2 a.m. I was just listening to a podcast at the time. Story 73. Scrolling through the pictures on my phone, I found images of me asleep. I did not take these pictures. No one else in the house entered my room in the middle of the night to take pictures of me. I do not have a significant other or anyone who would be in my room taking pictures of me while I am asleep. I am still confused, frustrated, and a little frightened. Story 74. It was 1 a.m., and it was just me and my 2 dogs watching television. I started hearing a slow tap on my front door, and so did the dogs. They didn't bark, but they perked up their ears and stared at the door. Slowly, I tiptoed to the door to lock it, as I typically left it unlocked. I live in town, down the road from State Trooper Barracks, generally a safe area. I immediately ran upstairs to find a weapon of some sort and to hide, but left my phone downstairs. After 5 to 10 minutes of nothing, I figured I was safe as the dog still hadn't barked, so I resumed watching television. I started hearing it again. My small dog began to growl. Next, the tapping escalated to knocking all over my door and 2 windows accessible from my front porch. My dogs freaked out. The small dog jumped and barked at the front door while I hid with my bigger dog and a knife near my back door so I could escape if someone broke in. This time, I had my phone, so I called my then-boyfriend who was at work. I then called emergency services and was crying from fear. The knocking stopped around the time I heard police sirens. I ran outside crying, and my boyfriend ran home to check on me. I had the car while he was working. The police did not see or find anything. I have no idea who did it or why, but it was clearly multiple people. I assume my ex did it with his friends because he was still upset about our breakup 7 months prior and was often drunk, but I am not certain he would do that. Story 75. I looked outside my bedroom window and saw a group of prisoners across the street cleaning the road. I noticed 2 guards, but when you are 14 and home alone, it is scary knowing they might try to escape. I quickly made sure the doors were locked. Nothing happened, but it really scared me at the time. Story 76. I had recently moved into a new apartment. Someone buzzed for about 10 minutes, and I ignored it, thinking it would go away. Next, a group of men started banging on my door, insisting I was inside and that I owed them money for drugs. I stood there completely frozen until they finally said the name of the person they thought I was. I was able to say I was not their guy, and then they left. Story 77. I was leaving my house in the middle of the day. As I was reaching for the doorknob, the knob turned by itself and the door opened. The house was definitely haunted. It was over 150 years old. I lived there for about 6 years. It was 2 stories, and many times I would be downstairs and hear footsteps upstairs. Other people heard them too. Items would disappear only to turn up months later in different places. My dogs would be sitting in the living room, and I would watch them both tracking something moving across the room, but whatever it was, I couldn't see it. Whatever was in the house was not malevolent, just a little pranksterish with the footsteps and the disappearing items. Story 78. 2 people entered my apartment looking very scared and frightened. I asked them for over an hour if they could just tell me what was going on, but they kept huddling together. Eventually, I got frustrated since I was helping them out and they couldn't even say a few words to me. I picked up the phone to call security and looked over at them to give them one more chance. By that point, I was very upset and realized it was just my coat rack. Do not take Ambien. Story 79. There was a thunderstorm while I was house-sitting for friends. It was getting late, and I was thinking about going to bed when suddenly all the windows in the sitting room blew open with a bang. One window would have startled me, but all of them at once. Every latch failed at the same time. I know it is irrational, but I took a kitchen knife to bed with me that night. Story 80. I wasn't home alone, as there were a few other kids, but our parents were out for the evening. We lived on a farm at the time, and our living room window faced complete darkness with no lights of any kind. It was winter, and we were playing a game when I looked out the window and saw a line of fire in the sky. There was absolutely no explanation any of us could think of for this. I went outside, and when I got closer, I saw that a heavy snow-laden tree branch had drooped onto a power line, and it was that cable that was on fire. The cable was invisible in the darkness, and being kids, we weren't really thinking about power lines or where they were. We just saw a floating line of fire in the sky. Story 81. The landlord trying to break into the front door was pretty spooky. It was not my teenage fault that my dad was playing rent games. Story 82. Fire. Luckily, it was just in the trash can in the garage. I ran outside and called emergency services before I realized what was happening. Story 83. Not sure if scariest, as in the superlative, but last night my microwave caught fire internally when I was trying to cook a parsnip in a steaming bag. I was in the next room. There is no door between the kitchen and the main room, just an arch, and noticed that the microwave sounded wrong. I went to check and saw flames inside the microwave. I quickly turned it off at the socket and was considering how to proceed. There was lots of smoke, which set off the smoke alarm. I opened the microwave to check. There were no signs of active fire, but still some embers. I considered using the mini fire extinguisher on it, but I had never used one before. A fire blanket seemed more suitable, so I used that to cover the embers. There were no signs of fire spread, but I called my local fire station to seek advice and make sure I did not miss any steps in resolving the situation. They sent over a fire engine, which felt like overkill given there were no indications of an actual fire spread. They checked it, removed the glass microwave plate and embers. When they left, I found they had left the plate in the sink. It was very badly burnt in the middle. I had assumed they would just take it to dispose of elsewhere. So I think I need a new microwave. Do you think? It had been a bit on the fritz sometimes, but seemed to be working. There are signs of rust on the edge, and I was concerned about it contaminating the food. I delayed buying a new one because they are expensive, and ideally, I would like one with numerical input instead of a manual dial, which feels imprecise. Story 84. I just moved into my house alone. It is an end Victorian terrace house, and I guess my neighbors were away when I moved in, as I hadn't seen or heard them. One night, I heard noise coming up the stairs. My bedroom door was shut, and I was trying to compose myself. It was so loud and scary. I thought I was being burgled. But no, they were just walking up the stairs next door. I think I aged 100 years. Story 85. In my house, you can hear people urinating upstairs through the ceiling. My mom had gone on a trip with my aunt, and I was home alone for 4 days. I came home from my dad's at 8 p.m. and never went upstairs for anything. About 20 minutes after arriving, I heard a sound like someone urinating upstairs. It wasn't running water. I know what I heard. I grabbed my cat, sat outside, and waited for the police to come. 6 police officers plus a dog searched the house but did not find anybody. I am made fun of for it relentlessly, even though I am an adult now and have stayed home alone many times without issues. I know what I heard that night. Story 86. I used to have a housemate who was out working for a weekend. He came home a night early and didn't think to tell me. I was upstairs and just heard the door open and someone moving around. I happened to be a Marine, so I grabbed a makeshift weapon and went to confront the person. I saw it was just him, and he was more scared than I was when he saw me. He told my sister the next day that he almost lost his life. Story 87. When I was a teenager, I was home alone getting ready to go out, and I saw a man looking in my bedroom window, which was eye level. He was right up to the window. I screamed, and the man ran off. I saw him run down the street, and it never happened again. What is more scary is that I never found out who he was. Story 88. One time I stayed at home and made myself breakfast. I got scared when someone started knocking hard on the door. I looked out the window and did not see anyone. After I opened the door, it turned out that someone had relieved themselves under our door. Story 89. Once my parents were on holiday, I received a text from my dad asking me to check the post. I saw a man and a dog walking by. I got up, opened the door, and saw the shadow of the man and dog coming up the driveway. He did not tell me to stop or wait. I shut the door and ran to the kitchen. I stared at the door and saw a black silhouette standing there, blocking the view of the trees. You can usually see the colors of clothes through the glass, but not this time. It was all black and not moving. I looked away and then looked back, and he was gone. I do not know what happened. Story 90. My kid has a toy called Miffy Hide and Seek. The idea of the game is to hide the toy from your child in a dark spot, and it makes a sound asking if you can find her. It is all fun and games during the daytime, but when you turn off the lights at night and forget to turn the toy off, it becomes horrifying. Out of nowhere, you hear a child's voice asking if you want to play hide and seek, followed by some cute laughter. Story 91. I was about 15 and home alone. I suddenly started to hear a groaning or humming sound from downstairs and felt a small vibration as it happened. Having been traumatized by childhood hallucinations in my bedroom, which involved terrifying visions accompanied by a very similar sound, I bolted upright. I went cold as ice. I just sat there, clutching myself, wondering if I had really just heard the sound of my childhood nightmares. A minute or two later, I heard the sound again, then again, and again. I was literally trembling and shaking. I had spent 9 years trying to forget these childhood hallucinations of this sound. I was frozen, couldn't move. Then the sound started again and again, now lasting longer and becoming almost continuous, with only short gaps. I panicked, phoned my mom, and told her there was a strange noise in the house. She left what she was doing and came home, but by the time she arrived, the noise had stopped, of course. She was mad at me for cutting her day short, and she didn't believe me. She just said, "I knew I couldn't trust you to be home alone," or something similar and snide. I eventually found out the source of the noise, and you wouldn't believe it. It was my mom's work smartphone receiving notifications. It was all the events for the summer season coming into her calendar, sent by her boss. Each event triggered another notification. She had 130 notifications. The phone had been sitting on a table, and the vibrations made the table resonate, creating the strange sound. Also, bear in mind this was the early days of smartphones, and I didn't have one myself yet, so I didn't know phones did that at all. Story 92. A few years ago, my parents' house was for sale, and I lived in it after they passed away. It was going to be auctioned soon. 2 weeks before the auction, in the middle of the night, a car with several men stopped in front of my house, started taking pictures, and then drove off. I wrote down the license plate number. A few days later, the same thing happened. A few days after that, in the middle of the night, a car stopped again, the doorbell rang, and the car drove off. It returned an hour later. I called the police. They asked if they were still there. I told them if they were still around, I would handle the issue myself, so they should send someone immediately. I gave the police the license plate number I had written down. 2 days later, the police showed up at my door. They said they had gone to the man's address and told him to stop harassing me. If he did not, he would receive a restraining order. I have not seen or heard from him since, and I have now moved out of the house. It turns out my neighbor across the street, who was awake at night, saw the same car stopping and taking pictures of my house from her house, so I had a witness. I was very close to confronting the situation myself. I understand that someone might want to check out the property since it was for sale, but not at 3 a.m. in a car full of men, taking cell phone pictures. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.